Okay, well, it is 9:31, so I think we should start. So thank you all for attending. We just have a couple of housekeeping announcements. Any questions or anything, please do in the Q&A. Dustin, do you have anything for housekeeping?
I'm good.
You're good? All right. So I have my script, so bear with me. We are honored to be joined today by Benjamin Tell, Deputy Chief Economist of CIBC World Markets, Inc. Benjamin is a member of CIBC economic team that is responsible for analyzing macroeconomic developments and their implications for fixed income, equity, foreign exchange, and commodities markets. He also acts in advisory capacity to bank officers on issues related to wealth management, household credit and risk, and corporate credit and risk. Well known for his groundbreaking published research on topics such as labor market dynamics, real estate, credit markets, international trade, and business economic conditions, Benjamin not only contributes to the conversation, but also frequently sets the agenda. Benjamin has close to 20 years of experience in the private sector advising clients, industry leaders, corporate boards, trade associations, and governments on economic and financial issues. He's also a regular commentator in the media. Benjamin is a member of the Economic Committee of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Committee of the Toronto Board of Trade. He is also a board member for the Governors of Junior Achievement of Central Ontario and Toronto Financial International. When do you have time to do anything else, Benjamin? My goodness. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule, obviously, to be with us today. And as Dustin and I have said, we have seen him a few times, and he is a little jokester as well. So to introduce myself, I am Deb White, the sitting chair of CMBA-BC. I'm very proud of our board of directors. Dustin is one of my fellow directors. Dustin?
Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'll just add the quick footnote that if you're newer to the industry, in 2008, I was brand new in the industry, and one of the very first presentations I attended was Benjamin Tall. And it was dark times in 2008, in the fall of 2008 in particular. And first, Benjamin scared the heck out of the entire room, and then brought us all back. And I hope that's what's going to happen today. If you're going to scare us at all, Benjamin, I hope you're going to bring us all back again. And without further ado, please.
I was just going to quickly thank our sponsors for your continued support. This is how we keep our webinars free for all of our members. So go ahead, Benjamin. It's off to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Listen, if the real and ultimate measure of intelligence is what you do when you don't know what to do, then the next few weeks, months, and quarters will test the economic IQ of every central banker in the universe, because they are the first to admit that they have no clue what's happening. Just the other day, somebody asked me, what do you think Putin will do next? And I said, you know what, next time I have coffee with him, I will ask. Like, nobody knows, but we have to try to ask questions and see what makes sense and what doesn't. So I would like to discuss a few things. One is this notion, to what extent we are back to the 70s, namely the inflation that we've seen in the 70s, the recession that was followed in the early 1980s, to what extent we are seeing something similar, we'll discuss. Clearly, we have to discuss Putin, what Putin means in terms of inflation, in terms of economic growth, as far as North America is concerned. The virus, unfortunately, still with us. We have to discuss the connectivity between the virus and the economy and the ability of the economy to coexist with the virus. Inflation, of course, the elephant in the room. We have to discuss, see what makes sense and what doesn't, how long, how high. Of course, when you talk about inflation, interest rates, they are rising very fast. They will continue to rise. How high, we'll discuss. And of course, real estate, very sensitive to higher interest rates, we'll discuss. But first, the issue of the 1970s. Are we back to the 1970s? Well, disco is not back. And that's maybe a good thing. But there are other things that are back. OPEC is regaining its pricing power. Why? Because North America, Canada, the US, they realize that green is replacing black. So we have a situation in which they are not investing in new production, and therefore OPEC has much more power, and OPEC plus even more power. Back then, there were Soviet tanks. Today, there are Russian tanks nevertheless. And clearly back then, inflation was rising, and inflation is rising today. So many similarities to the 1970s that ended with the double dip recession of the 1980s. So the question is, how similar it is. Yes, there are similarities, but there is one big difference, and that's inflation expectations. If you care about interest rates, the mortgage market, the housing market, you must understand the issue of inflation. We'll discuss inflation in a few minutes, but let me just put something in perspective here. At the end of the day, when you talk to clients, this is not about inflation. I can tell you that 2 or 3 years from now, inflation will be 2%. Why? Because for 40 years, the Bank of Canada and the Fed established their reputation as inflation fighters. They are not going to toss it away. They will do whatever it takes, even if it means taking the economy into recession, to make sure that inflation is back on target. So it's not really about inflation, it's about the cost to bring inflation back. This is very, very important. A big part of this cost is inflation expectations. The Bank of Canada, the Fed in the US, they don't care about inflation today. They care about what's in your head. If they believe that you are starting to be convinced that inflation is not under control and you are raising your inflation expectations, then they are panicking. They would like to prevent it from happening. This is their nightmare scenario. They don't want to see inflation expectations rising. As you can see from this chart, they are not rising yet, very different than the 1970s. Back then, inflation expectations were so high, wages were rising as quickly as prices, and that's why the system was feeding on itself. This is not the case now. So far, inflation expectations are still at 2%. Now, this can change if the Bank of Canada is not careful. And therefore, let's see what leads to those expectations. And according to many surveys, there are 4 items that impact our psyche in terms of inflation expectations, what we pay attention to. One is the price of bread. The other is milk, of course, gasoline, obviously, and of course, beer. Those are the 4 items that impact our understanding of inflation and define our expectations. And you can see that clearly today, it is much higher than it was during the past 20, 30 years, although lower than it was during the 1970s. So expectations should not be as high as we have seen in the 70s. Much more important, where people get the information upon and the best decision about inflation on. The most significant and reliable source, apparently, according to many people that were surveyed, the highest credibility score goes to social media. Interesting, more than government, more than TV, no more than newspapers, social media. That's extremely important. Now, the good news is that the Bank of Canada has a Twitter account. The bad news, nobody is following it. So maybe you want to make Justin Bieber the governor of the Bank of Canada, maybe somebody will listen, because the Bank of Canada does not have the attention of the public. Therefore, by talking and by tweeting, they cannot impact your inflation expectations. They must do it by doing. And therefore, the Bank of Canada has been so aggressive recently, raising interest rates by 50 basis points after 50 basis points, because their nightmare scenario is that they will fall behind the curve, and you and me will start thinking that inflation is not under control. So they must do it as opposed to tweet about it. That's the reality of the situation. Given that, we have to understand where we are in the inflation story. But before that, we have to discuss 2 more things. One is the situation in Europe. And of course, you read the newspapers. I'm not telling you what's happening because nobody really knows, including Putin. But I think that we have to ask the following question. To what extent the situation in Europe, from our perspective, economically speaking, is inflationary or recessionary? And the short answer, it is inflationary. We are twice removed from the situation economically speaking. As you know, due to the commodity market, Canada is benefiting from the crisis vis-a-vis the commodity market. So we know that economically speaking, the channel is inflation. It's much easier, quite frankly, to predict the long-term implications of this crisis. We know that we are at the end of the post-Cold War order. Unfortunately, Russia is a pariah country by now. And in a Cold War, if you are a third party, you must choose a side. We know where we are. If you are China, do you know where you are? All eyes are on China. It will be very interesting. We are in the midst of a global arms race. Spending on defense will continue to rise, including in Canada. Cyber is a low probability, high impact scenario. The Russians are excellent in cyber. The Americans are better. So therefore, the likelihood of this happening is relatively low. Split internet, two internets that don't talk to each other, already happening. Deglobalization started with Trump, continued during COVID, and now accelerating because of the war. And if globalization was anti-inflationary, deglobalization is clearly inflationary, we'll discuss. Greener, faster? I think so. You have to go back to 2011, the nuclear accident in Japan. After that, Angela Merkel in Germany decided she doesn't want any nuclear in Germany. She doesn't want any accidents. She shut it down. You need energy. What do? You call Putin. All of a sudden, 40–50% of their energy needs come from Russia. And that's more or less where we are now. And that's why energy prices are elevated, because the EU is trying to get out of this dependency on Russia, and that puts pressure on energy prices. That's more or less where we are. So that's the long-term implications of the situation in Europe. Clearly, from a short-term perspective, it's more inflationary than recessionary. But then we have to talk about other things. The next one is this. Very quickly, what's that? You have to go back to grade 7 geometry. That's the number pi. Why pi in the middle of an economic presentation? Because pi happened to be the letter that comes after Omicron. You see where I'm going with that? If you think that you cannot get a straightforward answer from an economist, try a virologist. They don't know. But what they are telling me that there will be another variant. By the end of this madness, we will be fluent in Greek. So the point here is that we have to make a working assumption about COVID. There will be another variant and more, but the question is to what extent it will derail the economy. And what I'm hearing from most experts in the field, it seems reasonable to assume that after all, 2022 will end up being a transition year from a pandemic to an endemic. It means that it's not over. It will be with us. The economy will be dancing to the tune of COVID, but at the same time, we will be able to function. So a working assumption regarding COVID, a transition year in 2022. If that's not the case, then all bets are off, but I think it's a very reasonable assumption. Given that, we are now ready to discuss the elephant in the room, and that's, of course, inflation. And let's start with the sources of inflation, because I know it's overwhelming. You read the newspapers, it's all over the place, 7–8%, 40-year high, you know the story. And in order not to go crazy with that, I try to isolate the sources of inflation, and there are about 4 of them. And I try to see to what extent each source is COVID related. Because if it is COVID related and COVID will diminish, it means that this factor also will diminish. That's a reasonable assumption, a way to look at inflation at this point. So let's start with the first one, which is energy. We are in the midst of an energy shock. And now you look at this chart very closely and you can see that every time we had an energy shock in the past, 5 minutes after we had a recession. And people say energy shocks lead to recessions. And I say, no, 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 no. It's not that energy shocks led to recessions. It's the reaction to energy shocks that led to recessions back then. Namely, a situation in which inflationary forces were caused by higher energy prices, and the Bank of Canada and the Fed had to raise interest rates to kill inflation, and they kill the economy as well. So the question is how inflationary oil prices are now. and they are less inflationary. You can see that our dependency on oil is going down. Our sensitivity to higher oil prices going down. Why? Because of efficiency. At any point in time, there is a tug of war between energy efficiency and usage. Our furnaces are more efficient, our houses are larger. Our mileage is better, our cars are larger and we drive more. So a tug of war, but as you can see, efficiency is winning because the absolute level of consumption per unit of GDP is down, which means that we are making progress, which means that the economy is not as sensitive to higher gasoline and energy prices as it used to be. Another interesting story is what's happening in Alberta. Usually, when oil prices go up, you see a significant increase in investment in the oil field. This is not the case now. We don't see the oil sector investing in any significant way. Why? Because all those oil executives know that green is replacing black. Do you want to spend $10 billion on expanding your capacity just because of the fact that oil prices are up for 5 minutes? You're not going to do it. So you can see something very interesting. Prices are rising, but investment not. And that's why I'm investing in energy, because all this money that comes from higher prices goes back to investors vis-a-vis dividends and stock buybacks. That's very interesting, but it means that the economy is not getting the lift that usually you get from higher prices vis-a-vis investment, again, less inflationary. So overall, the need to remove themselves from Russia means that oil prices will remain elevated. But when it comes to inflation, which is a year-over-year rate of change, I think that we are very close to peak inflation when it comes to energy, and our reliance on energy is not as high, and therefore I don't think that energy is going to be a major source of inflation over the next year. Let's go to the next one, which is the biggest one, and that's supply chain. That's about 60% of inflation as we see it now. And if it goes down, then inflation will ease. So we have to understand that. Let's focus on the chart to the left. That's consumption of goods, not services, goods. Look what happened in 2021. We squeezed 4 years of consumption in terms of growth into 1 year. Why? Because it's easy. You press a button and you get your exercise bike. Very easy. Just to put it in perspective, this increase in the consumption of goods, not services, goods, in 2021 is equivalent to a situation in which overnight you parachuted 75 million new Americans into the US, 75 million. And the minute they landed, they started to spend. That's what we are talking about. And people say, yes, but never underestimate the American consumer. And I say, yes, but give me a break. How much stuff do you need? We have been consuming for 2 years now. The point that I'm making here is that even a normally functioning supply system will have difficulties dealing with this demand shock. And this is not a normally functioning supply system. It's very, very sick. So you have a sick supply system dealing with the mother of all demand shocks. Of course, you will have prices rising. And that's exactly what we are seeing. Now, take COVID out of it for a second. The demand shock is all about COVID and the supply shock is all about COVID. Take COVID out of it and this will diminish. And that's exactly why I believe that if 2022 is a transition year, then the virus will not be as significant in terms of derailing the economy. And therefore, it's reasonable to assume that a year from now, we will not be discussing supply chain the way we are discussing it now. I think that's a very reasonable story. In addition, a lot of this consumption energy that went to goods is now going to services because we are opening up. We have enough goods, now we want the services. And I suggest that this shift from goods to services is disinflationary because you don't have the same supply chain issues. If you start overcharging in your restaurant, I will open a new one to compete with you. It's much easier to start a new restaurant than to establish a new manufacturing facility. So that's more or less where we are. And therefore, I believe that supply chain is extremely important, a huge portion of our inflation. And the Bank of Canada can take interest rates to the sky. That will not impact supply chain. The only thing we need is to see it slowing down. And the only question is whether or not it will slow down quickly enough to prevent from the Bank of Canada from raising interest rates too much, and we'll discuss in a second. So that's the supply chain, which I believe will ease over time. The next inflationary force is rent. And rent, I believe, will rise because it hasn't risen during the pandemic as opposed to house prices. We have seen a situation in which the ratio of home price to rent has risen to the sky, and I believe it will start going down, which means that rent inflation will be higher than house price inflation for the next year or two. And we all know why the housing market has been on fire, because of the asymmetrical nature of this recession. All the jobs that were lost were low-paying jobs, young people, renters. Home buyers, potential home buyers, their job was there, their income was there, and interest rates went to the basement. So if you think about it for a second, home buyers and potential home buyers during COVID got the benefit of a recession vis-a-vis a significant decline in interest rates without the cost of a recession vis-a-vis a broadly based increase in the unemployment rate. We have never seen anything like that. That's the story. Now, of course, given the fact that this period meant that we were borrowing activity from the future has arrived with interest rates rising and the housing market slowing down. That makes sense. Rent will continue to rise, I believe, because of huge demand and not enough supply. So that will be inflationary and will remain with us for a while. The next source is the labor market. We simply cannot get enough people. And what's interesting, wages are rising, but the lower your wages, the higher your wage inflation is. We're talking about wage inflation is the highest among low-paid occupations because you cannot find them. You cannot find them. And if you get somebody, they stay for 5 minutes and they leave because they switch. And you can see that inflation, wage inflation among job switchers is double the wage inflation among job stayers. And most of them are low-income individuals that see their wages rising. That's extremely important. Now, during COVID, the share of low-paid individuals went down dramatically, which makes sense. They had to leave their job. They were unable to work in restaurants and hotels, and they got government money. Fine. Now the market is back to normal. The unemployment rate is back to what it was. And the question is, where are they? And people say, oh, maybe they're staying home and they're resting and they're collecting still money. That's not the case, because if you look at young Canadians, their participation rate is back to where it was. So it's not that they're sitting at home doing nothing. So where are they? And I think that something big happened during COVID that changed the structure of the labor market. What I mean by that is the following. Before the crisis, we had a significant mismatch in the labor market. We had jobs without people and people without jobs. We had a significant mismatch in the sense that university graduates were serving coffee. We all know the story. And is it possible that COVID created a situation in which now we can Zoom, we can work remotely, and all of a sudden, a person in Toronto can find a job in Alberta that is equivalent, consistent with his or her skill set, and they don't have to serve coffee? I think the labor market is much more flexible because of Zoom, because of remote working and the ability to do so. So you have more options to highly educated people, which means that they shift to higher paying occupations. And we left without anybody to serve coffee. And that's more or less where we are. Another part of this puzzle is immigration and the composition of immigration. You have to go back to October 2020. The Canadian government is announcing that they would like to see no less than 400,000 new immigrants in 2021, 400,000. People said, are you crazy? How can you get 400,000? You know, COVID, nobody's moving, nobody's flying. 400,000? We got 401,000. Just to put it in perspective, the US got 500,000. We got 400. The last time I checked, the US is still 10 times larger than we are. So per capita, we got 6 times more new immigrants than the US. So when people compare the real estate market, Canada versus the US, also ask them to compare that. Now, interesting, 70% of all those new immigrants arrived from one country. And this country is Canada. Well, how is it possible? Because they were already here. They were non-permanent residents, they were students, they were basically in a situation in which their visa expired. And the government said, don't worry about your expired visa. While you wait, why don't you apply to be a permanent resident? And that's exactly what happened. 70% were already here. Most of them were students. And they are younger. They are more educated. They speak the language. They are more employable. And we can see this huge increase in the employment rate among new arrivals, especially in 2021. So something big is happening here. And again, usually if you have new immigrants going to some of those low-paying jobs, now because of the fact that they are more educated, maybe they are going to the higher paying jobs as opposed to lower paying jobs, reducing the supply of low paying jobs. Very, very interesting, but that's exactly what's happening. I'm speculating that that's part of the significant change in the structure of the labor market due to COVID. Clearly, this lack of workers means to higher wages, but wages in the US are rising much faster because they are less supplied, because again, their immigration is very different than ours. Establishing that, we now can continue to discuss interest rates. We know that inflation is there. We know that some of it is supply chain, but some of it is wages and rent that will remain with us. So we need to deal with it. And therefore, we need to discuss the effectiveness of monetary policy. And this is a tale of two countries, namely the ability of the central bank to impact the market. The gray line is the bank rate, the Fed's funds rate, namely what the central bank can control. The red line is effective interest rates, what's actually happening in the field, what people pay. And you can see that the Fed funds rate went up in the 2000s. The red line did not move at all. Why? Because, you know, we have seen a situation in which back then, American bankers in their creative imagination were able to neutralize the Fed. Remember all those ninja mortgages? That's exactly what happened. Even in 2017-18, when interest rates went up, the red line was basically flat. Why? Because their mortgages are for 30 years. Our mortgages are for 5 years. So we are more responsive. So when the Bank of Canada moves, you see the red line moving as well. And that's very significant. It means that the Bank of Canada is more effective in its ability to impact the market. As well, we are sitting on much more debt. You go back to 2008, the US went through the mother of all deleveraging. We haven't. We were second-hand smokers when it came to the financial crisis, which means that we had more debt per capita. And when you have more debt, you are more sensitive to the risk of higher interest rates. How sensitive? Double. I estimate that 100 basis point increase by the Bank of Canada is equivalent to 200 basis point increase in interest rates by the Fed, which means that the Bank of Canada is more effective in its impacting the consumer. Basically, what I'm saying is that the tiny Bank of Canada is more powerful than the mighty Fed. And this, of course, has implications regarding the trajectory of interest rates. So let's discuss interest rates. And that's what the market is expecting now. That's what the market is pricing in, a situation in which the Fed and the Bank of Canada will go to about 3%. We are now at 1.5. So about 3%, some say 3.5, depends how you measure it, but basically 150 basis points higher than it is now. That's what the market is pricing in. And it seems that the Bank of Canada is in a rush to get there. Remember, they want to establish their credibility. They want to make sure that we are not lagging behind, that we are not behind the curve, that inflation expectations are not rising. So they are going very quickly. Some people speculate that the next move will be 75 basis points. I don't know, but they are moving fast. And they would like to get to 2.5 at the minimum like that. Now, the issue is what goes beyond that. The fact that the market is expecting 3 or 3.5 does not mean that they will get there. This market can be wrong. A year ago, the same market expected the Bank of Canada to move a full year ahead of the Fed. That was wrong. In 2017, when the Bank of Canada was raising interest rates, the market priced in 2.5% terminal rate, namely that the Bank of Canada will end at 2.5. They ended at 175 and called it a day. Why? Because the effectiveness of monetary policy. When you have this kind of ability to impact the market, maybe the disease is also the cure. Maybe the increased sensitivity to higher rates will prevent interest rates from rising to the sky. You see, that's more or less where we are. And that's the hope that will lead to a situation in which the Bank of Canada will not overshoot. We are in a situation in which every economic recession over the past 40 years was helped, if not caused, by a monetary policy error in which central banks raise interest rates way too quickly and basically kill the economy. We have to prevent this kind of situation. I meet with the Bank of Canada very often, unfortunately, and I tell them, go to 2.5 and relax. But the issue is that inflation is a lagging indicator. Inflation is telling you about the past. You go back 40 years, you can see that inflation peaked on average 6 months after the beginning of a recession, which means that inflation does not tell you about the future, but show me the central bank that will resist raising interest rates facing higher inflation. That's more or less where we are. Therefore, we need to see some easing in the housing market. We need to see some easing in supply chain for the Bank of Canada come, let's say, September, to stop and not overshoot. The probability of this happening, namely the Bank of Canada getting it right and not overshooting, is maybe 70%. But there is 30% probability that they will be blinded by higher inflation that is not slowing, and it takes time for it to slow. And that's the risk of raising interest rates too much. Of course, when you talk about interest rates, you have to discuss the housing market. And the housing market is slowing, and that's a very good thing. That's a very good thing. We are getting into a balanced market. It might be even a buyer's market soon. And that's, again, a good thing. We borrowed activity from the future. We cannot have prices rising by 50% every 2 years. We need to correct. Prices are down. The number one casualty, of course, is the low rise segment of the market, exactly what we have seen in 2017-18. The condo market is also starting to slow down. Investors are not investing. They're not exiting, but they're not investing. And speculators are getting out of the market. So the market is slowing down, and that's a good thing. And the question is how quickly it will slow down. That's a function of how quickly the Bank of Canada will raise interest rates. If we stop at 2.5, even 2.75, I think we'll be fine. The market will slow down, we'll find equilibrium and relax. If we go to 3.5 very quickly, that can be the difference between a no recession and a recession story. And that's when the adjustment in the market will be more significant. However, regardless what the scenario is, whatever we see here in terms of the adjustment in the housing market is just an adjustment. The long-term trajectory for this market is still high because the fundamentals are way too strong. We still get 450,000 new immigrants on its way to 500,000 every year. Many of them come to Vancouver, to BC, and clearly Ontario. The demand is there, and the supply is not there. So you can correct, even another supply market can correct, and this market is adjusting, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, the fundamental aspect of lack of supply is still there. I'll give you an example. For example, labor. We desperately need more construction workers. You look at investment in real estate went up. Employment in construction, hardly. Why? Because we cannot find them. By the way, how many new immigrants out of the 400,000 in 2021 were in construction? Basically zero. So we have to realign the situation because, in my opinion, the number one issue facing the housing market supply issue is labor. We cannot find labor. The cost of construction is rising at a rate we haven't seen before, and the time that it takes to complete is basically double what it used to be a few years ago, which means that time is money. That's adding to the cost of the finished product. And of course, you can see that construction costs are rising faster than condo prices, which means that developers are seeing their margins shrinking. And I had meetings with at least 5 big developers, 2 of them in Vancouver. They are canceling or delaying projects like there is no tomorrow. We are talking about tens of thousands of units that are not going to enter the market over the next 2 years because they are postponing it because of this. And when I talk to policymakers, they say, yes, but you know what, those developers, they can take that, they're all loaded. And I say, even a millionaire developer will not build if it doesn't make sense economically speaking to build. And that's an issue because when we wake up, and we will wake up 2 years from now after this slowdown, and demand will be back, and the market will be back, the supply will not be there because we are delaying projects now. These are tens of thousands of units. Guess what will happen to prices? That's something that we have to understand and discuss. So to sum up, I think that interest rates will be rising very quickly over the next few months. The Bank of Canada would like to take it to 2.5, and I suggest that's when they should stop, maybe 2.75. Beyond that, if you go very quickly to 3.5, let's say, that can be the difference between no recession and a recession. I believe that the Bank of Canada will start seeing some softness in the housing market, and the hope is that in October, November, we might see some slowing in supply chain that will convince the Bank of Canada that enough is enough. There is no reason to overshoot because inflation is a lagging indicator. With some common sense and some luck, I believe we can get there. I will stop here and see if we have time for a discussion.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. That was very enlightening. I took a lot of notes. It's, especially about Justin Bieber. That was funny. But I just want to take another quick moment to thank our sponsors. Remember, they are the reason that everyone is here. If you're a member for free, Home Trust, Canadian Mortgage Inc., BC Notaries Association, Canadian Western Bank, Optimum Mortgage. Really appreciate your support. We're running short on time. That's why I'm quickly going through this. Also, after the event, we will send out a feedback because we'd like to hear your comments. And we're going to open the floor now for questions if you like. And remember to go to our website, CMBA-BC, and check out our upcoming events. We have a lot coming up. Justin, do you want to field some questions?
Absolutely. I think I took about 6 pages of notes myself.
Yeah.
And so thank you for that. The verb, as there's a few questions starting to come in, but very, very quickly, I'll selfishly put one in right of my own here. At the end of your presentation, you noted that 2 years from now, we're back. And as you were talking about developers, delays, rising costs, yes, interest rates are going up right now, values are going down, but my takeaway, correct me if I'm wrong, feels like if I can get myself as an individual investor into a pre-sale closing 3 years from now, 4 years from now, in a relatively protected contract, that's probably strategically the right thing to do. And that contract, it may take them 5 years to finish building that property, but everything you're saying, it sounds like, is that at a certain point, a few years out from now, prices will be back where they were and will keep on going. Is that?
Yeah, I do believe that that's the case. Remember that prices went up dramatically over the past 2 years. So we have to adjust for a while to go back to semi-normal. So I will not be surprised if in some cases prices will actually fall over the next year and a half to bring this adjustment. Then we stabilize. But I believe that the lack of supply and the demand story suggests that after that, prices will climb. And I believe that they will climb fast because of the fact that we are now hurting supply. Supply is not coming because of the cost of construction.
Well, and speaking to supply, first question we have here is, what about the potential rezoning of office buildings in downtown cores? If the Zoom shift is fundamental, have you any research at all to suggest there's the potential for rezoning office buildings into residential buildings to help supply?
Yeah, I think that that's the direction. Depends what kind of office buildings. I'm not convinced that you will see a huge vacancy in Class A, office buildings. I don't think that will happen. It will be more on small businesses, Class B and Class C, and some of them will be converted, which will be a good thing. That's part of the strategy regarding supply, but that's a small part of the whole issue.
Benjamin, yeah, one question was also, now I forgot it because my brain just went good night. We said we had 401 new immigrants to our area. Do you have any data or information on Canadians that actually left Canada due to the pricing?
Yes, that's a very good point. We haven't seen a significant exit out of Canada So the inflow is much more significant than the outflow. So the net increase in population is very, very significant. But it's a good point because the opposite can happen. You know, we have been talking about you know, a situation in which there was a brain drain over the past few years. You know, people were leaving Canada to work in the US. Now, because of the fact that work is a commodity, you can work from your home, and therefore you don't need to leave Canada. But we haven't seen a significant number of Canadian refugees leaving Canada because of home prices, but we have seen them leaving the cities. And that's clearly what happened over the past 2 years.
Benjamin, are you able to speak at all to the movement in variable rate discounts? I believe there's something called the VIX that influences that, but you know, you see prime going up, and the layman would think, okay, with prime increasing, there must be more margin. Why is the discount from prime vanishing? Like, there's been a full percentage point swing on the discount as well.
Yes, banks are looking at the discount that was very generous at 110 basis points before the crisis, and now they're shrinking it in. What they're telling me, and I don't follow it very closely, is that it's just about spreads, and they have to maintain the spreads, and the cost of borrowing for the bank has risen as well. So that's part of it.
Thank you. One suggestion here, perhaps technology is the solution for the low-paying jobs, and we'll be getting all of our coffee from a vending machine.
Actually, that's a very good point. I didn't have time to get into it because if you look at we have 2 minutes. If you look at what happened over the past 20 years, profit margins went up dramatically. Why? Because of 3 factors: globalization, which is always good for business, just-in-time inventories, and cheap labor. All those forces are now going the opposite. Basically, you have deglobalization, you have just-in-case inventories as opposed to just-in-time inventories, and we have a situation in which labor is not available, clearly expensive. So what we are starting to see more and more and more, companies have to react to it. They cannot just take it. How do they react? They do what we have done in the 1990s. You basically increase productivity. How do you do that? You replace labor with capital. And we're starting to see it happening already. So absolutely right, that's the solution. That will increase productivity, which is, by the way, the #1 protection from inflation.
There's 2 remaining questions here quickly.
Yeah.
One
Which
refers
ones?
to immigrants. Right.
Yeah.
Is it still the same old story? Is it Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, or are those sort of your top 3 cities that the immigrants are pouring into, or are they also spreading out?
There are all kinds of programs to convince them to spread out. So far, it's really not happening, quite frankly. You look at the numbers and it's dominated by the big cities. That has to change in order to make the situation better, but not yet.
And then the other question, Benjamin, was everybody wants to know, yes, the Bank of Canada rate, but what about the fixed rates? What do you think are they going to do? Of course, I had a client in last week said they're going to go to 30%. I told her, look outside, sky was not falling.
Yeah, we have to remember that the 5-year rate is already reflecting those expectations. The 5-year rate is a market that is a rate that is driven by the market. It's not the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada cannot move the 5-year rate. The Bank of Canada can move the bank rate and therefore the prime rate and therefore variable rate. So the 5-year rate is already pricing in this 3% that we were talking about for the bank rate. So any movement for the 5-year rate now, from now, is going to be very marginal. Maybe another 10, 50 basis points. We're not talking about a huge increase. So don't confuse what the Bank of Canada is doing and with the 5-year rate. The 5-year rate is already thinking about it.
Perfect, thank you. Benjamin unfortunately has to have a hard stop in 1.2 minutes. So do we have time for one more quick question, Dustin? What do you think? Slide one in?
You know what? I actually don't think I see one there. I think we're good to
Okay,
go. I think we can
on.
let you out a few seconds early. Benjamin, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Good luck with everything. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, you are such a wealth of knowledge. I always take away, and I followed you since the beginning of my career 23 years ago. So, well, actually 20 years, but thank you so much.
Thank you and good luck. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Benjamin. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And please check out our website for upcoming seminars. And if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to email Dustin or myself at all. Thank you again for all your comments. And remember, CMBA-BC is here for you. And if you're not a member, why aren't you?
No kidding. Membership has its privileges, guys.
Absolutely. You get to listen to you and I think we're like what is it, Kelly Ripa and Ryan Seacrest? There we go. We're your BC version.
There you go. I think he has better hair than I do.
And I think she's a lot smaller than I am.
Fantastic. And again, yeah, I think it was a great event. And I will say, as far as membership goes, yeah, I myself joined both associations, the provincial and the national, day one of getting licensed. And I've been a member of both associations from day one. I think we need advocacy. We need voices in the provincial level. We need voices at the national level. The more voices, the better, guys.
Exactly. And yes, the recording will be available. I'm not sure when, but we'll make sure it's available to our membership. So if you're not a member, you won't get the recording. Just putting that out there again, become a member. I mean, I've been a member nonstop since the beginning of my career. And at first I was hesitant about joining, but I see all the advantages that being a member does. I mean, I've met so many great people. You get to know your lenders. It's just a great advantage to be a member. And what's the cost? Really? It's less than a coffee a day.
Well, and if you want to really make the pitch here, I would add that the number one reason I started going to all these events was because who's at the events? People who've been in the industry 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years. Heck, we've got members that have been in the industry for 40 years.
Yep.
And having access to those brains, getting a few minutes of chit chat with, industry icons, that was high value in my book when I was starting out. And you want to be successful, you hang out with successful people. And that's what these industry events that we put together are.
Exactly. And that's why we have the panels, why we have the information. You learn from those who have done in the past, right? I mean, I know we don't learn from our parents because they talk to us and we ignore them, but now that we're older, we look back and go, yes, that was the right thing to do. So learn from your mentors. We're here to help you, right? And it's get to know us before we retire.
There you go. Well,
right.
Do brokers retire? I think they're just usually found hunched over their keyboards, at 80 or 90 something years of age.
I know. I've been asked a few times lately when I'm going to retire, and then people say, Deb, you're never going to retire. I love the industry. I love the people. I love everything so much. I love helping the people. So until they have to drag me out kicking and screaming, or unless my children say, Mom, we're kicking you out, then I guess I'm still here.
Well, Deb, you've done what they tell you, what all the smart people tell you to do, right? You found a job that you love, and therefore it's not a job. You've never worked a day in your life in the brokering space. It's all just roses and rainbows. I'm
just sad that I found it late. I mean, I started brokering when I was, how old was I? Not quite 40. So I've been doing it for, I'm not going to say how long because then you'll know how old I am, but it's I found it late in my life, but it's just been so rewarding. So I've got my retirement all set up, and it's just a rewarding plan that, you know what, if I go to Mexico, I can still work. I can still be in touch with the industry. I can still answer my clients' questions. I remember back when I started in 1999, the programs were on your computer, and unless you had a laptop, you couldn't take it with you. So it was, you'd have to go to the office. So the way the industry, technology, as well as the changes in the industry, the insurers have changed it's incredible. I don't have enough fingers and toes to count how many times things have changed. Like it was, when I started, it was only 75% land value, and now it's 80.
Yeah, well, and I mean, think about the shift we've just gone through with the pandemic. I mean, that probably did dramatically change a lot of brokers' retirement plans, because to your comment about Mexico, I know of not one, not two, not three, but about I think it's close to 10 brokers now who are living in Mexico full time, more or less, or at least half the year. And you would never know. Their clients don't even know. It's a seamless transition back and forth.
It is. I mean, you look at how much technology has changed. I mean, when I would sit in the office, I would get a fax, and then you'd have to go photocopy that fax because it was on Mylar paper. And yeah, and then unless
leave it on your desk in the sunshine, and suddenly the
yep,
whole
it's all
message is gone.
black, right?
Yeah.
Or goodness, you put your coffee cup on it and you got a ring, right? So back in the day, it was called Vicom. So if they came and did an audit on you, you've got this Mylar paper. Well, whoops, it was there. I promise it was there. So that was the day. Yeah, so it was definitely changing. So, but CMBA-BC is definitely keeping up on that. We've got a great, fantastic board of directors right now. Our new ED and their staff is incredible. So if anybody has any questions about CMBA-BC, remember you can reach out to any of us at any time. Just go onto the website and click on any of us and you can contact us directly. The one thing I love about our board this year, Dustin, is we're not just from Lower Vancouver or the Lower Mainland, pardon me. We've got a broker in Prince George, we've got brokers in the Okanagan, we've got brokers in the island. So we truly-
representative in Squamish.
There you go. Representative in Vernon, the Okanagan. So we truly are your BC Mortgage Broker Association because we are all across BC and we know the trials and tribulations in the smaller areas to the bigger areas. Because I mean, if I get $1 million mortgage, I'm phoning somebody going, hello, look what I got. I actually had a broker from Vancouver call me to help her about a mobile home in Salmon Arm because she didn't know what to do.
Well, yeah, I was going to say even at this point, brokers in Vancouver, when they get an insured file, they're like, whoa, insured. What's this?
That's the other call I got from her as well. I was just like, how do I do an insured file? What do I do with this? So that's our bread and butter up here.
Yeah, but again, too, you highlight the nature of our industry, right? So much sharing, and again, to maybe circle back and wrap it up. That's what the membership is all about: is making those connections at those events and having that broker that you can pick up and phone in the interior or in the city because, hey, I met you at that event, and anyway, I've got this file, and that's how a lot of mortgages get across the finish line.
Well, that's exactly right. And going to these events and being participant and being there, not just showing up for the parties, but going to the event, going to the seminars. I have met so many brokers, I have met so many lenders, and so I'm able to phone them, or they feel free to call me. Hey, Deb, I have a question on this file. Can you help me out? And that's part of being, we're not cutthroat. We want to help each other, right? So yeah.
It is wonderful industry that way.
It is. It is.
All right. I've got a hard stop in 7 minutes. So
exactly. I was just going to say, let's wrap this up. And I want to thank everybody once again for supporting CMBA-BC. Thank you, Dustin, for being my Ryan Seacrest. And
thank you, Deb. It was great.
Okay, you guys. Thanks everyone for joining us. And remember, check out CMBA-BC. Bye, y'all.